Hello, and welcome to the Trauma Uncomplicated podcast, where we untangle the ways complex trauma formed you and your relationships and give you the tools to get your grounded, true self back in the driver's seat. My name is Christy Morgan, and I'm a relational trauma therapist. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It is a very cold day here in Colorado. We just got our first little dusting of snow. And I bring that up because, many of you might know that our family recently moved full-time into a camper to do some traveling full-time. And it was our first night in the camper where the temperatures dropped below freezing. And I had a trauma response that got activated. And basically what happened was we walked into the camper. I smelled some propane last night and immediately started going into this survival response and, catastrophizing over, are we going to blow up? What's going to happen? Good news, we did not have a propane leak. Everything was fine. But the way that we talk about our trauma response has a lot to do with the relationship we build with ourselves. And if you've been listening on my podcast, you probably hear a lot about building this self-trust and self-compassion in this healing process. And our language plays a really important role in this. Okay, it matters how we talk about our trauma, how we talk about ourselves. And I'm going to talk today about the difference between using the word trigger versus maybe a more helpful term of access point. So this reframe of language was actually introduced to me by a fellow therapist, Barbara Sheehan-Zeidler. And, you can go and listen to a podcast recording by her on Trauma Uncomplicated. Her episode is about polyvagal theory. But beautiful concept because it really engages this ability to be compassionate with ourselves in some of those more heightened and scary moments in our lives as trauma survivors. Because at the end of the day, the way we talk about our trauma impacts the way that we heal. So, just a quick snippet. In my work, I have found that the word trigger can often feel pretty pathologizing. Something's wrong. We need to brace ourselves against some threat, right? It kind of brings up this avoidance response. It almost even strengthens that fear response in us. Whereas when we talk about an access point, it shifts the focus to something more empowering and helpful. Okay, it's now I have a window into my trauma. I can see it more clearly, and from there, I know how to respond well. So we hear the word trigger all the time, right? It's being used a lot right now. You see it all over social media. People use it even when they're not talking about trauma. People are using it right now to talk about somebody upset you and it triggered you, right? It agitated you. It got you angry. And so it's being used quite a bit. And we need to really get clear on what exactly is this trigger that we hear people talk about all the time. And is this a word that we want to use? So when we say that we're triggered, it often means that we've encountered something that brings up a painful memory or a reaction from our past trauma. And it's something that sets off a strong emotional response in us. And because trigger, that word, has these associations with being set off or activated, it tends to bring up this image of something to be avoided. It's like a warning sign that tells us, be careful, danger. And while this might seem protective, it can sometimes make us feel powerless, as though our trauma responses are these uncontrollable forces we just have to manage or work around. And I know I have experienced this in my own trauma healing, especially in the early stages, where I felt like I couldn't walk through my life or even through that day without this fear of at any moment something is going to activate my survival response. And it's scary. It makes us feel like we need to white knuckle our way through the day. And it can also, this word can also feel very pathologizing. It makes our trauma responses seem like something that are abnormal and something to be wary of or ashamed of, when really these responses are completely natural for anyone with a trauma history. And I would even go so far as to say it is appropriate for your nervous system to have this survival response when it encounters something that reminds it of its trauma. Right? Like our brains are trying to protect us. Our bodies are trying to protect us. And they're doing exactly what they should do. So when we label these trauma responses as triggers, we're left feeling like we have to avoid or fight against them rather than allowing ourselves to learn from them. Right? Like we want to get to know ourselves. We want to get to know, what does that wound involve so that I know how to heal it well. So this is where I find the word access point to be so powerful. When I say access point instead of trigger, I'm shifting that focus from this avoidance perspective to exploration, curiosity, responsiveness. So think of it this way, okay? An access point is an invitation. It's an opportunity to get curious about what's coming up for us. So rather than reacting or judging ourselves, we ask questions, we look deeper, we lean in. Okay, so trigger is a leaning out, it's an avoidance kind of word, whereas access point is a leaning in. I'm not afraid of you. I honor that you are trying to protect me. Let me get to know you. I want to know what's hurting you so I can help you and support you. Okay, so with access point, we move into that place of curiosity where we can explore why our bodies are reacting this way and what they need, or, how we can better respond to this pain that it's feeling. So instead of something to avoid or fear, an access point becomes something that's actually directing us to a place where we can learn more about ourselves and start to heal. So how does shifting from trigger to access point change our relationship with trauma responses? Okay. So I think there are a few major benefits here. And the first is that curiosity over judgment. We've talked about this a little bit, but instead of instantly moving into this judgmental place or this fearful place, we can pause and ask ourselves, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And it might be as simple as asking, what am I feeling right now? What is my body experiencing right now? And by choosing that curiosity, we're allowing ourselves to go deeper rather than reacting on the surface level. And that act of curiosity is actually going to help bring us out of that trauma response. We're going to, invite that higher self back into the driver's seat, where we can now start to relate with ourselves from a healthy place rather than feeling like we're in this survival mode and, purely operating from our limbic system, our emotion and survival center of the brain. So even that act of curiosity is going to start helping us feel safe in the moment and keep us from spiraling. Because I don't know about you, but with me, when I just remember there were early on in my trauma healing, I remember having days where I would get activated, that access point would come up, and I would spiral out of control. I felt completely out of control, and it would last for days. I would just have this like emotional hangover, and it was scary. But once I started to get curious, that emotional hangover didn't last as long. My whole day wasn't, completely thrown off. It was, okay, I can respond and now I can come back to my baseline. So the second benefit that I see with switching our language from trigger to access point is what I like to call compassionate inquiry. So trauma responses aren't random. They're deeply tied to experiences that often have unprocessed pain or unmet needs behind them. So when we see these responses as access points, that's our opportunity. Okay, it's our opportunity to ask ourselves compassionate questions like, what might this be reminding me of from my past? Or what need or boundary might this reaction be pointing to? A question I like to ask my clients in therapy is, who else is in the room, right? Like, am I reacting to what my partner just did, or is there someone else from my past that my nervous system is remembering right now and reacting to? So it's all about understanding rather than suppressing what we're experiencing in the moment. And then the third major benefit would be that awareness brings empowerment. When we approach our responses as access points, we realize that we don't have to be controlled by our past experiences. And while we can't always control how we feel, we can control what we do with that feeling. So this awareness gives us choices. Okay, it's empowering because we no longer are just reacting and being thrown about by whatever we encounter in the day, but we can actively work toward understanding ourselves and healing those wounds. Something I tell my clients in my coaching program all the time is that once you can learn to see yourself on that deeper level and see what's actually happening and understand it, that's when you have choices. You now know what's going on and can respond appropriately, right? It's kind of like when you go to the doctor, okay? You go to the doctor, maybe they run some tests, okay? Sounds like you have strep or you have COVID or whatever it is, right? And now, because we understand, we know what to give you or what to do in order to help you feel better and heal. So once you can actually see what's happening, then you have choices and you can actually choose to do things in your life that help you feel safe or to respond in ways that are actually going to be supportive and help you actually heal, right? So one of the big things about trauma is, and anxiety in general, is that when we have anxiety or trauma and we're in this fear response, our gut reaction is to avoid it. But the thing is that when we avoid the thing we're afraid of, that only heightens that anxiety. So avoidance doesn't work with us. So once we can demystify it and really get to understand what's happening, we can make some choices that help us lean in a way that's not re-traumatizing, but instead is going to support us and help do that healing work. So how do we put this approach into practice, right? Yes, we can switch our language, but what does it look like to actually explore an access point in real life? So if you want to start using this new language, here are a few questions you can ask yourself the next time you notice that you're going into a trauma response. Okay. And I would actually even just invite you right now, if there is a moment when you got thrown into a trauma response in the recent past, maybe even just bring that to mind gently right now, right? Whatever feels within your capacity. And ask yourself these questions. Okay. What am I feeling right now and why? Just naming our feelings can be powerful and can lead to deeper insights about why we're having the response we're having. Okay, so what am I feeling right now? Where in my body do I feel this activation? Some people say they feel it in their solar plexus. My spot is often the neck or the jaw. Where in your body do you feel this activation? When we focus on where we feel a reaction physically, it can help us to connect to what's beneath the surface. Our bodies are such beautiful friends of ours. They love to tell us what's going on. So do you feel tightness in your chest? Do you feel a knot in your stomach or tension in your shoulders? Okay, these physical sensations can be clues. They can give you a roadmap to understanding what's going on. And the last question I'd invite you to ask is, what past experience might this be bringing up for me? Or another question is like, who else is in the room? Trauma responses often connect back to things from our past and all the things connected to those. So when you can identify any similarities between the past and the present, that can give you some insight and help you untangle what's going on inside. I had a professor in my graduate program explain trauma responses like a chain. Okay, think about a chain with many links in it. We tug on one link in the chain, and what happens? The whole rest of the chain comes with it. When you have a trauma response, you might be pulling on one link in the chain, but you feel the intensity and the weight of all of those links piled together. Okay, and that one link that you're tugging on is that access point. So as we tug on it, we feel, okay, what am I holding on to right here? What else is attached to this? Does it feel like a 4-foot chain or a 10-foot chain, right? Like, what am I bringing with me right now into this moment? And can we thank ourselves, thank that trauma response and that access point for giving us an opportunity to see what's there? When I say this, I'm not saying like, oh, we should keep those trauma responses around. We should keep those access points around. Like, they're great. Like, no, I understand. I'm there with you. Like, when we experience an access point, it is painful. It is so painful, but it is an opportunity. Okay. So we have a choice there. We can add to our suffering by allowing ourselves to spiral and avoid, or we can help ourselves heal. We can get curious and lean in and be like, okay, thank you, access point, for showing me that I have all these other things connected to this moment right now. Now I know what I need to work on. I know what needs to be healed. So let's look at a couple examples just to make this feel more tangible. Okay, so say you notice that you get a very strong reaction when your partner doesn't text you back right away. You just shared something very vulnerable, you're expecting a response, and it's radio silence. All of a sudden, you notice your heart is pounding, your hands are sweating, you're fidgeting, you are starting to notice this language come up inside of, oh, I shouldn't have shared that. I'm so stupid. Oh, what are they thinking of me? Whatever it is. Instead of labeling this just as a trigger, let's try seeing this as an access point. What might be bringing up for you? Okay. Is it tapping into that fear that people won't show up for you when you need them? Or that if people really saw the real me, they wouldn't love me. And ask yourself, are there any other situations where you feel this same response? Okay, what are the themes here? So getting curious here can open up a whole new world of understanding, getting to know yourself, and then developing that compassion and a really deep relationship with yourself of like, okay, I know when this comes up, I know how to respond. I know what I need. Let's try another one. Okay, so maybe you notice somebody steps over a boundary of yours, and all of a sudden you feel intense anger, like rage pulsing through your limbs. Instead of seeing this as an uncontrollable reaction or hating yourself because you're an angry person and you shouldn't be angry, or whatever it is you like to say to yourself in those moments, try seeing it as an access point. Okay. Explore, like, why is this such a painful experience for me? I often talk about anger as when we notice anger showing up in ourselves, it often points to one of three experiences. And obviously this isn't totally covering all the different experiences your anger can point to, but three of those main ones being fear, a sense of injustice, or a sense of disrespect. Okay. So this access point just gave you a window into your anger. What is that anger about for you? Okay. What is it about? Is it that you feel disrespected? Is it about feeling afraid? Do you feel like there's an injustice here? And then does this connect to times in your past when boundaries weren't respected? Or maybe it's just showing you that you need to reinforce this boundary. You need to do something now to respond to that anger to help you feel safe, because right now you don't feel safe. So by leaning into this, you might find it a little bit easier to honor your needs in a healthy way. So I hope this conversation about access points has helped you just start to engage a deeper relationship with yourself. And, as trauma survivors, that's our lifetime pursuit, to deepen our relationship with ourselves, to be that person in our lives who knows ourselves so intimately that we can respond when we need to respond in a way that's full of compassion. It's full of, this deeper understanding, this curiosity. We want to be able to build that self-trust where, okay, I can trust myself to show up when that pain comes up. I don't need to be afraid of being quote unquote triggered by my outside environment, because I know that I have this deeper sense of trust in myself that no matter what comes up, I will be okay, because I know how to lean in, and I know how to get curious, and I know how to respond. So next time you notice a trauma response coming up, I invite you to pause, take a breath, and approach it as an access point. Instead of fearing it or pushing it away, tune into what's coming up and let curiosity be your guide. This shift is so powerful because it encourages us to look at our trauma responses as invitations to understand ourselves better. And when we can do that, we can start healing from a place of compassion and empowerment. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to reach out and share any experiences you've had with reframing your triggers as access points. You can reach me through Relational Healing Co. That's my handle on Instagram. And until next time, take care and remember to approach yourself with compassion and curiosity, because you deserve it. You are listening to the Trauma Uncomplicated podcast, where we untangle the ways complex trauma formed you in your relationships and give you the tools to get your grounded, true self back in the driver's seat. If you are ready to take that next step and dive deep into your healing, visit relationalhealingco.com, where where we offer tools, resources, and personalized coaching to help you heal your trauma and thrive in your relationships. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or psychological advice. If you are in the United States and you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 to reach the National Crisis Hotline.